Let's talk about Genesis 41 through 45. As always, I'm going to assume that if you are watching this video, you have probably watched at least some of the other videos. You have been reading along with the book of Genesis up to this point, at least part of the way. So you basically know what's going on in the story. So I'm just going to pick it up exactly where we left off in the last video. And that means that we are picking it up with Joseph. Specifically, we're picking it up with Joseph in prison. Beginning of the story, Joseph has been waiting in prison for 2 full years. So far, with no release, no sign that God is going to help him. He's just been rotting in the prison. The Lord interpreted the dream of Pharaoh's bearer. He revealed himself to Pharaoh's cupbearer through the process of empowering Joseph to interpret his dream. And he said, when you are exonerated and restored to your position, remember me. Bring me with you. Use your influence on Pharaoh to have me released for this crime that I was falsely accused of. But for 2 long years, nothing has happened. And yet finally, now, the cupbearer remembers Joseph. It says Pharaoh has this dream that disturbs him, and he needs someone to interpret the dream for him. And finally, after years, he remembers that he was supposed to bring this guy Joseph, who interpreted his dream, out of the prison with him. And so for these past 2 years, Joseph has had to just wait. He's had to just trust that the Lord will bring him out when the time is right. He's had to just have faith that if he is still in prison right now, it's because right now he still belongs here and that he will be freed when it's time. God's timing does not have to make sense to us. And as it turns out, Joseph's trust was well placed because God has been keeping him here in this prison cell for all this time so that at exactly the right moment, the cupbearer could present him to Pharaoh himself, to the most powerful man in Egypt. And at that time, since Egypt was one of the world's superpowers, one of the most powerful men in the world. Why? It's because God is using this entire experience to reveal the falsehood of the pagan gods that Pharaoh has grown up with, the occultism that Pharaoh has grown up with, by giving Pharaoh a dream that none of the pagan diviners can interpret, none of the occultists can interpret, none of the sorcerers can interpret it, none of the Egyptian wise men can interpret it, none of the professional dream interpreters can interpret this dream. All of them are stumped. All of them are powerless. God is doing something really specific for Pharaoh. He is showing Pharaoh, these are not the paths to truth. Instead, he is going to reveal the truth to Pharaoh through Joseph. But he primes Pharaoh up to be receptive before Joseph ever enters the picture. First, he reveals his sovereign power to Pharaoh. And the way he does that is there's going to be 7 years of plenty, 7 years of abundance, where Egypt produces vastly more food, more grain, more livestock, more harvest, more crops, more wealth than it could ever possibly use. So they're going to have to keep on building bigger storehouses to store the abundance. Then they're going to have to tear those bigger storehouses down to build even bigger ones to store the abundance. Then they're going to have to tear those down and build even bigger ones, and then tear those down and build even bigger ones, and so on and so forth, because of all the plenty that is coming their way during these 7 years. And then they're going to be immediately followed by 7 years of absolute famine. Nothing will grow. The wells will run dry. He tells Pharaoh about this in advance, and then Pharaoh gets to see it with his own eyes. He is revealing his sovereign power to Pharaoh. He's saying essentially, your gods do not have power over the harvests. I have power over the harvest. Your gods do not have power over the fertility of your livestock. I have power over the fertility of your livestock. Your gods do not have power over your safety, your security, your ability to establish yourself in the land and stay established in the land. I am the God who has the power to do all those things for you and to take them away. Now, submit to me. God is preparing Pharaoh to be receptive to the truth through the mouth of Joseph. And in very much the same way, the Lord reveals himself to Pharaoh with absolutely zero ambiguity when he gives Pharaoh this dream that none of the other gods or sorcerers or wise men or occultists or diviners or pagan priests can interpret. But then he sends this foreigner. Remember, in ancient Egypt and the ancient Near East in general, they despised foreigners and saw them as subhuman. This imprisoned foreigner who was falsely accused of rape by a blood and soil Egyptian woman is going to be able to interpret this dream that none of the best and the brightest in Egypt could. And so the cupbearer brings Joseph to Pharaoh and he says, this man has the power to interpret dreams. And Joseph stops him right there and says, actually, no, I don't. He says, I cannot interpret your dream. Yahweh, the one true God, can. This is the mission God gave to Abraham in action. When God came to Abraham in Genesis 12, he said, through your offspring, all the peoples, all the families, all the nations of the earth will be blessed through your bloodline. The mission I am giving you, the work I am doing through you, is that I will introduce all the surrounding pagan, Gentile nations to me so that they can leave behind their false worship of false gods and take up true worship of the true God. I am building you, Abraham, into a nation that will be the messengers, the priestly people who will introduce the others to me. And the thing that we have to understand from Genesis 41 is that this mission is the reason God often elevates us to positions of influence. God often elevates his people to positions of power and influence, but it's not because he just has a kind of favoritism towards us. It's not because he likes us better. It's for this missional purpose. When God places you in a position of influence, it is not to make you influential. It is to make him influential through you. When he places you in a position of power, it's not to make you powerful. It is to give you a platform by which you can introduce other people to him. When he gives you wealth, power, influence, status, whatever, it is so that you can use those things for the sake of the mission he has given you. God does not care if you have a Rolex. He does not care if you have a nice car. That is not what favor is. The favor and blessing that the Lord places on his people throughout the story that the Bible tells is all about glorifying him and fulfilling his mission. And when God pours out that blessing onto his people, what happens is that blessing spills out and it blesses others. God's favor on Joseph, his blessing on Joseph, empowering him to be able to interpret these dreams, raising him up to one level of power and status in Egypt after another, leads to the blessing of Egypt. And it leads to the blessing of all the surrounding nations. When the famine comes, Egypt is prepared and Egypt is able to provide food all the other nations too. God's gift to us is meant to spill out onto those around us, to reveal him to them. They see his hand at work on our behalf and in our lives, and then they are blessed by us. It's like God is glorifying himself through their secondhand blessing that rolls off from us. And so Joseph goes and he presents himself to Pharaoh and he interprets Pharaoh's dream. But when he does it, he does something very specific. It says he shaved and he changed into respectable Egyptian attire. These are both requirements in order to gain a hearing from Pharaoh. What Joseph is doing is he's removing every unnecessary barrier that might keep Pharaoh from listening to the truth about God. He's saying, my prison beard is going to stand in the way of Pharaoh listening to the truth that I have to share with him. So I'm going to shave this beard off. My Hebrew clothes are going to stand in the way of Pharaoh listening to the message that Yahweh has given to me for him. So I'm going to change it to Egyptian clothes. My style does not matter. What matters is getting him to listen. My preferences do not matter. What matters is getting Pharaoh to listen. I don't need to demand my own way. I don't need to demand that he come meet me on my terms. I'm going to come meet him on his terms. I'm going to remove every unnecessary barrier so that there is nothing he can reasonably use as an excuse not to listen to the truth about God. So he goes and he interprets Pharaoh's dream, and Pharaoh listens. Pharaoh responds with faith. Now, this is not necessarily a full understanding. This is not necessarily Pharaoh fully upending his entire life, his entire spirituality, and leaving behind all the gods of Egypt and exclusively devoting himself to the God of Israel. That is not necessarily what is happening here, but this is a sincere response on Pharaoh's part. Pharaoh is responding to the extent that he understands. So he says to Joseph, you have the Spirit of God. And he actually places Joseph in charge. He elevates Joseph to a position of significant power in Egypt. He says, I want as many men like you with the Spirit of God in positions of power in Egypt as I can possibly get. This is a partial, incomplete, but sincere response to the truth about God. So Joseph is given an Egyptian house. He is given an Egyptian wife. They would have had to have done that. That was a status thing for him. It would have been extremely rare for a foreigner in Egypt to be given a blood and soil Egyptian wife. We know from history that Asenath, his wife, was actually a pretty important person in Egypt. She was from an important priestly family in Egypt, which is kind of strange. And yet something really important happens here. Because unlike Esau and unlike Judah, this Gentile wife that Joseph is married to does not become a problem. Esau and Judah married pagan women and they paganized their children. They raised Esau and Judah's children to worship the false pagan gods instead of the true God. That is not what happens with Joseph. And we see that in the way that Joseph names them. Joseph clearly names both of his children with signal names. These are names that signal that they have been devoted to Yahweh, that they are being raised to worship Yahweh. He names his first child, God has made me forget my hardship. And he names his second child, God has made me fruitful in the land of my affliction. Now, Joseph still is not perfect. We saw that in the beginning of the story. Joseph is not fully mature by any stretch of the imagination, and yet Joseph understands what so many of his brothers and ancestors did not understand, and that is that we can trust the Lord to carry us through our hardship and affliction and suffering. God has made me forget my hardship. And because we can trust the Lord to carry us through our hardship and affliction and suffering, we can be faithful even when our circumstances and the pressures we are facing and our struggles pull us toward living like Babel, living like Cain, trying to manipulate our way into the blessing that we want, rebelling against God's will and God's ways for the sake of self-preservation or for the sake of success. Joseph understands we don't have to do that because the Lord will carry us through everything. And he knows that so deeply that he's literally named his kids after that reality. That is Genesis 41. Now it's time for the major turning point. This is the kind of the final stretch of the Genesis story. It begins in Genesis 42. So let's talk about Genesis 42. We rejoin Jacob and the other 11 sons. And as always, it starts off in an unbelievably depressing place. As we open up Genesis 42, we see that Jacob still has not slain the sin of favoritism toward the sons of Rachel especially now Benjamin. And we see that in the fact that Jacob refuses to send Benjamin to Egypt to buy grain because he is afraid that Benjamin will get hurt or even die on the way there or back. Now, he's willing to send his other 10 sons. He's not worried that they're going to get hurt. He's only worried about Benjamin. His other 10 sons are disposable for all Jacob seems to care. His other sons are comparatively dispensable. They're expendable. Jacob favors Benjamin over his other 10 sons. He cares more about this one son of Rachel than he cares about all the sons of Leah, Bilhah, and the others combined. And this favoritism grows out of the same place that basically all of Jacob's problems seem to grow out of. That is that he does not truly trust in his bone that God will protect and preserve his people, including the favored son, Benjamin. If Jacob truly trusted in the deepest parts of himself that the Lord will protect and preserve his covenant people, then he would know he can send Benjamin to buy grain, but he doesn't. So he doesn't. Jacob is still not fully transformed. He's come a very long way, but he is still captive to the bondage of favoritism. And that favoritism comes from not trusting. And yet here's the really remarkable thing. What's happening here in the story of Joseph, which like we talked about last week, and as we're going to see today, is really the story of Judah. God is using Joseph to grow both his brothers and his father Jacob. So when the brothers arrive, they get to Egypt, they are confronted with Joseph, brother that they betrayed, seriously considered killing, and ultimately sold into slavery. He is the man who now holds their fate. That is a bad place to be. And yet they don't actually know how dire their situation is. They don't know that this is Joseph. They don't recognize Joseph. Joseph recognizes them. And so now he has a choice. Do I get revenge on the brothers who betrayed me, or do I rescue brothers who betrayed me? Joseph is in a position now where he has to determine whether these brothers who betrayed him are still the same people they once were. Are these the same wicked men who sold him into slavery because of their bitterness, out of revenge, because of the way that their father favors Rachel's sons over them? And so he essentially kind of tests them. Although test is, it's not wrong, it's just, it doesn't fully capture what's happening here. For lack of a better word, I'm just gonna say test. Joseph creates a multi-step test. He's gotta figure out, will these brothers safely bring Benjamin to him and protect Benjamin with their life? Benjamin is Rachel's other son. So Benjamin is the same thing today that Joseph was a decade and a half ago to them. Will they protect Rachel's favored son Benjamin in a way that is fundamentally the opposite of what they did to Rachel's favorite son, Joseph? In the same way, will they be honest and give their money to him after they find it in their bags, or will they just keep the grain and the money and run? Just to see, have his brothers changed? Or are they the same brothers who betrayed him and will now betray Benjamin? But he's also testing his father, Jacob. This is one of the things that we often miss. He has to figure out, is Jacob capable of changing? Will Jacob let go of his favoritism toward Benjamin in order to let the brothers take him on the journey? Or will Jacob sacrifice his other 10 son in order to protect his one favored son, Benjamin? So Joseph has to test both whether his brothers have changed and whether his father is willing to change. This is a test of repentance. What does Joseph find? What he finds is that the brothers genuinely recognize that they deserve the hardships that they're going through right now. They recognize that they deserve everything that has happened to them because of what they did to Joseph. They recognize that what they did was genuinely wrong. And that's a clear indication for Joseph that they have at least grown somewhat. His brothers are thinking in terms of covenant morality rather than just thinking in terms of the ancient Near Eastern pagan mindset like they used to. But at the same time, we unfortunately see that Jacob has not come to genuine repentance. He is still clinging to his favoritism. He refuses to send Benjamin. And since Simeon is being kept as collateral, Jacob is essentially deciding to sacrifice Simeon for Benjamin's sake. He is deciding Benjamin matters more than Simeon. And so chapter 42 ends in a really dark place. But even in this really dark place, there's something incredible happening, and that is that Joseph is literally in the exact position that his dream prophesied at the beginning of the story. He is literally ruling over his brothers, just like his dream prophesied. This is the exact thing that enraged his brothers when he told them about his dream. And yet, this fulfillment, him ruling over them like this, them bowing to him, is gloriously good news for his brothers, not bitter news. The point that we should be taking away from this is that even when God's plan do not put us in the position we think we want, do not give us the thing we think we want, do not provide the things we think we want, still, they are good for us. His brothers thought it was degrading to be ruled over by their little brother Joseph, and yet to be ruled over by their little brother Joseph is going to be the thing that rescues them, the thing that elevates them, the thing that pulls them out of the pit. That is Genesis 42. And Genesis 42 is setting the ball up on the tee. It's setting up all the dominoes so that they can start to come down in a really beautiful way, beginning in Genesis 43. So let's talk about Genesis 43. Chapter 43 once again begins us in an unbelievably kind of gut-wrenching, really discouraging, frankly, like upsetting place. Because we rejoin Jacob once again. And it's honestly pathetic. Jacob actually seems to have regressed over the past couple of decades. He's come to the point where Jacob's idolatry of his favored son, Benjamin, is so all-consuming that he's actually angry that his sons didn't lie to the Egyptians about having another brother. He says, "Why have you treated me so badly by telling the Egyptians that you had another brother, Benjamin?" He says, "You guys should have been scheming. You should have been calculating. You should have calculated the fact that it would be a problem if you told them you had an additional brother," which is an insane thing to even think. But he's actually yelling at the brothers for being honest instead of lying. He's yelling at the brothers because he thinks they should have been scheming like he did in his old days rather than telling them to trust the God of the covenant. And so he refuses. He says, "No, I am not sending Benjamin. I am not sending Benjamin. I am not sending Benjamin." To be clear, Jacob is sentencing his son Simeon to a life of slavery in Egypt at best, or at worst, death. There is only one thing that is radical enough to shake Jacob out of this really pathetic, favoritistic spiral. And that is, surprisingly, Judah. Remember, Judah was the worst of Jacob's sons at the beginning of the story. And yet Jacob is rattled awake by the radical transformation that he sees in Judah. Once upon a time, Judah sacrificed his favored brother Joseph for his own gain, but now he is willing to give his life to protect the favored brother Benjamin. He says, "Listen, I will bear the responsibility. I will put myself between Benjamin and anything that may harm him. If they try to harm Benjamin, I will give them myself as a sacrifice instead." God has changed Judah through experiences like the Tamar situation from last week, to the point that today, Judah is actually living, thinking, sacrificing himself like a covenant head. Like, it's important for us to grasp, Reuben is the firstborn. Reuben is the shoe-in to be the head of the family once Jacob dies. So Reuben is the one who should be doing this. Reuben is the one who should be making these promises. And Reuben is the one you'd expect to be making these promises, because Reuben is the one who has shown the most character so far out of Jacob's other sons. And yet, it's Judah, the constant failure, the Esau-esque dropout. Judah is the one who demonstrates this radical transformation. And he says, "I will protect your favored son, Benjamin, even if it costs me everything." And this transformation that the Lord has worked out in Judah, this is the thing the Lord uses to break Jacob out of the hyper-favoritistic spiral so that he will send Benjamin. And we see something really beautiful and really heartbreaking at the same time. Jacob accepts at long last that the Lord gave him Benjamin, and the Lord can take away Benjamin. The Lord can bereave him of Benjamin, and he can trust what Yahweh does. In either case, he says, take Benjamin with you. If I am bereaved, I am bereaved. And so at long last, they take Benjamin. They go to Egypt. They stand before Joseph once again. But before Joseph can welcome them with open arms, he has to do a few further tests. And this time his test really gets to the heart of what led to all of this in the beginning. He visibly favors Benjamin. He gives Benjamin portions that are 5 times larger than all the brothers. He gives Benjamin pride of place. He is clearly favoring Benjamin above all the other brothers. He is doing exactly the thing that has triggered the brothers into mistreating Joseph through the years, into hating Joseph, into betraying Joseph, almost killing Joseph, and ultimately selling Joseph into slavery, which is in a lot of cases worse than killing him. So he visibly does the same thing for Benjamin Jacob did for Joseph. He does for Benjamin exactly the things that got his brothers to sell him into slavery. And so the question is, will they react with rage the way that they did with Joseph, or will they accept that Benjamin is being favored over them? And that's okay. Well, the brothers passed the test. They see what happens, and they just keep right on rolling. They don't take the bait. They don't respond to the blatant favoritism in front of them with hostility. They don't let the favoritism in front of them bait them into sinning against Benjamin. That is Genesis 43. I just had a meeting that ran so long that the sun went away while I was inside there. So the last little bit of this video is going to be in the dark, I guess. But let's talk about Genesis 44. Joseph has one last test that he has to give to his brothers. He has his people plant a silver divining cup. That was a kind of a tool that ancient Egyptian pagans would use. Now, the fact that Joseph has them put this divining cup in there and kind of, does the whole bit. He says, "Oh, you stole my divining cup." That doesn't mean that Joseph actually uses this Egyptian divining cup. Now, it's entirely possible that he does, right? We've already talked about the fact that Jacob and his children, they don't seem to fully understand everything. And even when they do understand, they don't always actually do quite what they are supposed to do, despite the fact that they are God's covenant people. So it's possible that Joseph does, but the fact that he has this silver divining cup doesn't mean that he uses it. This is for the bit. It's for the test. Stealing someone's divining cup in the ancient Near East, that was a really serious infraction, punishable by death, slavery, other things like that. That's the big reason why they use this. He has them hide the divining cup in Benjamin's bag. So whenever they chase them down, overtake them, and search all their bags, it'll be found in Benjamin's bag. So now Benjamin is in danger. This is the point of the test. He's testing, will these brothers protect the unjustly favored son Benjamin, or will their bitterness at the favoritism move them to abandon Benjamin? They have a perfect opportunity just to cut and run, say, "Oh, Benjamin stole this cup, so he got taken," and just leave. They literally have an opportunity to be rid of the favored son and technically not have done anything wrong. So will they take the bait, or will they protect Benjamin? Joseph gets his answer. The brothers bend over backwards to protect this favored child, Benjamin. The old brothers stabbed the favored child, Joseph, in the back, but these are not the same brothers they once were. This version of his brothers bend over backwards to protect the favored child, Benjamin. We see that in a couple of ways. First, when Benjamin is arrested, they go back to the city with him. They don't have to do that. They could just go home, but they go back to the city. They say, whatever happens to Benjamin, we're going to be there with him. Then they offer to be Joseph's slaves in order to keep Benjamin from being harmed or killed. They say, listen, we are your slaves. They're putting themselves between Benjamin and the things that pose a threat to him. But then even more than that, Judah himself, the worst of the brothers, the brother who hatched the plan to kill Joseph, then hatched the plan to sell him into slavery. The ringleader behind the betrayal personally substitutes himself for Benjamin. He says, take me instead. Let Benjamin go free. I will take his punishment. This is the opposite of what he did to Joseph. Judah has changed. All of these brothers have changed. And very specifically in the case of Judah, he shows a covenant-oriented mindset. Just listen to the way that he describes what's happening here. Judah believes that God is doing these things to him and his brothers in response to their covenant-breaking behavior toward Joseph. Judah explicitly appeals to his responsibility as part of the covenant people. Judah explicitly says he's concerned with protecting both his father, the past generation of the covenant, and his younger brother Benjamin, the future generation of the covenant. Judah is being revealed right here in Genesis 44 as the true torchbearer of God's covenant people for this coming generation. Joseph may be ruling over them, but Judah will be the covenant bearer, not Reuben the eldest, not Joseph wisest, Judah, formerly the worst. Judah, the one who has been radically transformed. Judah is going to bear the torch of God's covenant people for the coming generation. God has grown him into someone who can. And through his line, this long promised Savior will come. This is a glorious conclusion to Judah's story. And so Joseph finally drops the act and reconciles with his brothers. We're moving from Genesis 44 into Genesis 45. So let's talk about Genesis 45. This is kind of the climax of this reconciliation arc that we've been watching play out. And we see a few very specific steps in the process of reconciling Joseph and his brothers. First, Joseph directly confronts his brothers about their sin toward him. He says, you sold me into slavery. He says, I am Joseph, the brother you sold into slavery. Now, he is saying this in the midst of his reconciliation, but this is a loving confrontation. He said, I am Joseph. You sold me. You wronged me. You sinned against me. He's not just letting them off easy. He is being very blunt and direct about how they sinned against him. But he says, do not grieve. Do not be angry with yourself. Why does he say that? He says, essentially don't beat yourself up. How is it possible for Joseph to say that? There's two reasons. The first we've already talked about. Joseph has seen their genuine repentance. He has seen that they have genuinely changed. They have actually become different people than they once were. They have grown. They have matured. They have repented. There is no point holding a repentant person's sin over them, because a person who is truly repentant is no longer the same person who wronged you. Even more than that. Number 3, Joseph recognizes God's sovereign hand at work, even in their evil actions toward him in the short term. He says, God did all of this through you in order to save your lives, in order to save his people. All of my suffering happened as a result of God's sovereign hand at work to protect and preserve his covenant people. You thought you were just getting revenge on me, but you were actually carrying out God's sovereign plan to bless me and prosper me and to save the lives of many people through me. This is essentially kind of the thesis statement of the book of Genesis. Joseph basically explains that everything that's happened has been to show how God's sovereign power shapes all of history, all of our decisions, even all of our sufferings. It doesn't mean that he controls our decisions. It doesn't mean that he brings our suffering onto us. That's not the point. It's that he works all of these things together in order to carry his divine mission forward. He elevated Joseph in Egypt to carry his divine mission forward. He is protecting his covenant people through Joseph in Egypt in order to carry his divine mission forward. He's been transforming Judah and the other brothers into godly, wise men in order to carry his divine mission forward. This is one of the reasons why I said some of the stuff I said in the first several chapters of Genesis. Genesis is not about creation versus evolution. Genesis is not about, whether the flood was all over the globe or it was just a flood of the inhabited section of the earth. It's not about the age of the earth or any of those things. None of those things have anything to do with what Genesis is about. Genesis is about God's sovereign power, bending all things in order to carry his redemptive plan forward. He even sovereignly bends the pagan Egyptian Pharaoh to give the Israelites, a bunch of foreigners, some of the best land in all of Egypt in Goshen. This is an empire that viciously hated and oppressed foreigners. And yet these foreigners in Joseph's family are right now being elevated to the top of the social ladder in Egypt. Why? It's not because they were clever enough to find a way to make it happen. It's not because they were able to manipulate their way into the halls of power. It's because God's sovereign power has worked all these things together for our ultimate good and his ultimate glory by carrying his mission forward. That is Genesis 45. Now, I know that there are so many questions that you might have about Genesis 41 through 45 that I didn't get a chance to talk about, just kind of working through all these chapters over the course of one video that is, like 45 minutes or an hour or something like that. I don't know how long this actually came out to. But so you can ask your questions in the comments of this YouTube video, or you can put them in the comments of the Let's Read Scripture Together Facebook group, and I will tackle every single one of them as soon as I get the chance. I will see you in the final Genesis video next week. But between now and then, I love you guys. Take care and keep reading.
Hey, what's up? It's Pastor Ryan from Mount Zion Baptist Church. I'm extremely glad that you watched our video, and I hope that the Lord used it to speak to you in a very powerful and specific way. Hit the like and subscribe buttons on this video so that you can keep up with everything that we put out and we come up a little bit higher in your algorithm, and send a personal message to our YouTube account. I would love to hear from you, get to know you, pray with you a little bit. Between now and then, take care.